Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. My question for you is regarding the opposite functions from those in our stack and how those relate to us being a sensor, intuitive, feeler, or thinker. I'm curious to know, how does the opposite, introverted or extroverted, version of a function affect a person's ability for that perceiving or judging function as a whole? For instance, would an ISFJ have a stronger extroverted sensing than an INTP, even though SE is in neither of their stacks, simply because they are a sensor? Likewise, would an INTP have a stronger introverted intuition over the ISFJ because they are an intuitive? So in summary, is a sensor in general stronger at any sensing perception than an intuitive, and vice versa for all the other functions? Or are the opposite functions completely irrelevant if not in our stack? Hope that makes sense. I know it was a mouthful, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen and for all that you do. I've really enjoyed the show. Thanks.
Thanks, Victoria, for the question. So I'm going to reframe the question, or at least ask it in this way. Which shadow functions are we the best at? I think that's a good way to ask it, because basically what you gave the example of ISFJ, right? So ISFJs have a driver or dominant cognitive function, mental process, introverted sensing. We've nicknamed it memory. And you're basically asking, well, they have access to introverted sensing, so they have sensing as their driver process, but it has an introverted attitude. What is their relationship to extroverted sensing? So the extroverted attitude of the same style of showing up to the world with sensations or with sensing. And you really get to the heart of this, because really there are 4 functions. There's not 8. If you really radically reduce it, there is sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. Like there's 4 core mental processes. And then we apply attitudes to where they're pointed. So we apply with sensing, we split it, and we have an attitude in the external world, extroverted sensing as an example. And we've talked about that's living sensing, that's living it out in the world. We talked about that in a recent podcast. Or the attitude of introverted sensing. So this is pointing inwardly. And this is more about processing sensing through our, after the experience, we process it later, and all of them follow this pattern. So extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, extroverted feeling, introverted feeling, and they all work the same. The extroverted processes are living this out in the outer world, and the introverted are processing it. So let's go back to the original question here well, what's my relationship? If I'm leading with a function and its attitudinal direction, what happens to the other side of that and its opposite attitudinal direction?
So to go back to what you had said before, Joel, which is that we're talking about shadow functions, which I don't think Victoria specifically mentioned, but that is effectively what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is the 4 functions that we do not prefer. And in Dr. John Beebe's model, he calls the first 4 functions Ego-Syntonic, which means that we identify with them and they're part of how we see ourselves. And the last 4 functions, functions 5 through 8, as Ego-Dystonic. Now, you just mentioned how there's basically 4 functions, right? Sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. And it depends on their direction that, or whether or not they're pointed outward, extroversion, or pointed inward, introversion. That's how it flavors the function, and that's how we get to 8. So the question of, is a person who leads with sensing, take for example, somebody with ISFJ preferences, are they going to be better at extroverted sensing? Like the sensing is their dominant or driver, but it's the introverted version. So they're going to be better at extroverted sensing than, say, somebody who has INTP preferences. And the answer is yes, they are. Now, when we go to the other attitude, or the quote-unquote shadow version of our function, it's not that we're bad at it. It's not that there's a lack of capacity. It's that there's something inside of us that goes, I'm doing this wrong. Yeah. If you have introverted sensing or memory as your driver function, when you're using extroverted sensing or sensation, you're going like, you might have a moment of it and you're like, yeah, but we need to be back in introverted sensing or memory, because that's the better use of this. So the closer the function is to our preferred function, the better we're going to be at it. So the other question was, would somebody have better, like would an INTP have better introverted intuition or perspectives than maybe somebody with sensing preferences? And the answer is yes, they would as well, because introverted intuition or perspectives would be their sixth function. And it's close enough to their extroverted intuition or exploration to be something that they're going to have more, the word I'm going to use is talent. They're going to have more talent with it. Now, that doesn't mean that they have skill developed, and they might not like the function. They might kind of push it away. But the reason why they're going to have better capacity with it is functions 1 through 4, and I've mentioned this a couple of times in these 10-minute type advices. Functions 1 through 4, one could call them a descending order of certainty, meaning that we have the most certainty in our driver or dominant function. In fact, we are over certain in some ways. We're going to have a modest sense of certainty in our second function. We're going to become uncertain. We're going to, for the first time, feel a sense of uncertainty in our third function, in our 10-year-old or tertiary function. And then we're going to feel deeply uncertain in our fourth function, or our inferior, or a 3-year-old in the car model. And I personally believe, and I asked Dr. John Beebe, if he would if he would agree with this assessment, and he gave it his rubber stamp. But I think that functions 5 through 8, right, which are basically the same functions but pointed a different direction, I think they mirror the same certainty scale as functions 1 through 4, meaning that we are the most certain in our fifth function, we are modestly certain in our sixth function, we are uncertain in our seventh function, and we are deeply uncertain in our eighth function. So if you look at things through the lens of like how humans behave when they're dealing with certainty or uncertainty, it's the reason why we have this kind of weird relationship with our 10-year-old or tertiary function. It's the reason why it takes so long to have us integrate our inferior fourth function. It's because we're dealing with a sense of uncertainty. Now, these are functions that are quote-unquote ego-syntonic, meaning that we identify with them. They're uncertain, but we identify with them. So now we have an incentive to get better at them, or at least bring them into more conscious awareness and do something about that. But if we have functions that are uncertain, but we don't have any relationship to them, like our seventh and eighth function, there is no incentive to even use this function, much less get better at it. In fact, what we end up doing is we end up demonizing it. We start seeing these characteristics and traits in other people, and we go, ooh, that's icky and wrong, and we push it away. And when it shows up for us, it always feels like this undermining experience. And so we will have more proficiency in our fifth and sixth functions simply because we have more certainty in them. Now, we might think that we're doing them, I'm doing this wrong, right? I should be doing it more like my first or second function. So we might push it away because it feels quote unquote wrong. But because we have more certainty, we're going to have more natural talent in it. We're going to have an easier time pulling on it, because it kind of feels like our natural terrain, but it's just got a different flavoring to it versus our seventh and eighth function, which we will always struggle with.
And by the way, just in case you're listening right now and you're like, whoa, 8 functions, shadow, dystonic, syntonic, like all these words and all this stuff, and it seems very complicated. Basically, we have to live in the realm and access the realm of all 8 of these areas of life and functions. And this is what we often talk about in our Personality Life Path mentorship, Antonia. It's 8 weeks, we take time and we find out our relationship to each of these one at a time, each week through 8 weeks. And then at the end of it, it's a live event where we connect it to a life path plan for your life based on your relationship to this. So for example, I have ENFP preferences, and my 3-year-old or fourth function, my inferior function, is introverted sensing or memory. I struggle with it. I have a lot of uncertainty there. I have some skill built. I have some capacity for it, but it doesn't matter how much skill or capacity I have built there. I'm always going to feel uncertain. The shadow of that, that's introverted sensing. The extroverted sensing in my life, that's my 8th cognitive function. We don't really talk about it much on the show or any of our shows because it's so far down there. That's more like for our trainings, like our PLP, for Personal Life Path. But ultimately, I have to be present. I have to notice details in my world. I have to be in action. I mean, I have to activate and be in the energy of extroverted sensing or sensation all the time.
Well, have experiences, spot opportunities,
Yes.
be aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah, I can't just say, well, that's my 8th function. I'm an ENFP. I have ENFP preferences. That's my 8th function. I'm just not going to look at that part of myself. I just won't have that as part of my experience. Well, that's not reality. That's not realistic. Now, will I ever be certain with that? Will I ever have a sense of feeling like I know what's going on there? No. I can have a relationship and I can make aware the things that are in my shadow there and the things that are undermining me. I can bring those into the light and go, okay, I can see what's happening and maybe get a handle of it. But I think that's why it's so important to look at all of this. I think your question, Victoria, is very important. I think it's very apt because we have to deal with all of these areas of life no matter if we want to or not, right? It doesn't matter what personality type you are. Everybody has to have a measuring stick or an external measurement of how much money do you have in the bank, how much progress have you made on certain projects. And these are all, like, as an example, that's in the realm of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. And it doesn't matter if that's your 8th function or not. You probably need to keep track of your bank balance. And you can't just say, well, that's just not one of my preferred functions, so I'm just not going to care about external measurements around resource. Like, that would be ridiculous to say that. So then you have to find strategies and your relationship to that aspect of life. And you may not like it, but a maturing person would now find their avenue of experience and their relationship to all 8 of these areas of life. And that's, again, what we work with people in the PLP, the Life Path Mentorship Program. So I think that's very important. I think your question's good, and I think this is a really great conversation starter. We don't have enough time to unpack the full expression of this, but we do have a lot of podcasts on some of these ideas too, on the shadow functions and the way these show up. And I think I would recommend some of the most recent shows on living the external cognitive functions. We talk a lot about these concepts in that. And then the idea of processing the internal, like using the internal functions, the introverted functions, to process the experiences we have in the outer world that we lived through the extroverted functions. So there's 2 podcasts that speak to this that I think I would direct you to, Victoria, that would be really good for you and other people who are interested in this topic to listen to. Thanks, Victoria, for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first. Because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.